Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this, the final learning session of the Friday of the second week of Devtoberfest. We've had some great content this week, and today in particular, the front end day, Friday, we've had a couple of great sessions, but we're going to end on a massive high. I'm super excited about this session. I've had a bit of a sneak preview, so I know a little bit about it, but I know it's going to be a massive learn fest. But before I introduce Arno properly and hand over to him, I just wanted to let you know that happening maybe in about a couple of hours after this session finishes is our Devtoberfest gaming night part 2, because we did one earlier today for people in the earlier time zones. So head on over to that URL after Arno's session. Tom Young is hosting that game night. Should be lots of fun. But without further ado, let me please introduce to you and hand over to Arno Buchholz, who is going to tell us all about ui5-test-runner version 3. Arno, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let me first share my screen. Okay, can you just confirm that it's okay? Okay, seems to be okay. So welcome to this presentation from Devtoberfest. My name is Arno Buchholz. I'm an SAP development expert for 8 years. I actually celebrated my 8th year today, so that's it. And I will introduce you to the ui5-test-runner, which is already in version 3. And the idea behind this presentation is to show you a new approach to ui5 test executions. The agenda for today, well, it will be, just to let you know, I won't be showing only slides, but I need to explain a little bit the context where I'm coming from. And I will also explain the current situation regarding ui5 testing. Then I will introduce the tool and explain you why we're already in version 3. And hopefully you will have some key takeaways that will give you the need to test the ui5-test-runner. So in order to set up the context, I would need to go back to 2018. The reason why it's because 2018 was actually my first participation to ui5con, where I did a presentation about OPA. So that was my first, I would say, live experience with presenting in front of many people. And I explained what is OPA regarding ui5 testing. And I will go back on that topic a little bit later. The year after, in 2019, I introduced a tool which allows you to test the OData service with ui5, and that was done inside Node.js. So there is a link to the tool here, but actually the tool is deprecated now. But the idea is that I was still continuing on this testing aspect. 2021, no ui5con participation for me, but I actually co-wrote a book called Testing UI5 Application. And then we have 2021, where I introduced for the very first time the ui5-test-runner, and I presented it as a different approach to ui5 test execution. And I will explain why I had the need to create this tool, and it was already in 2021. The next year, well, last year, I didn't participate to ui5con, but I actually co-wrote a second book called Clean UI SAP UI5, in which we present all the different ways to make sure that you build clean code on top of SAP UI5. So it talks about as simple as writing some UI5 code, but also it talks about testing, maintenance. How do you make sure that the team collaborates the right way on SAP UI5 projects? So it's quite a huge book, and we cover many topics. It's a recommended read if you're working with SAP UI5. This year, I wanted to go to ui5con, but for some personal reasons, I could not attend live ui5con. So that's the reason why I decided to present the tool in different ways. So this Devtoberfest is a way for me to remind people that ui5-test-runner exists, and also to show you the latest features that were added to it. So hopefully this is clear. My focus at SAP is development, but also testing and code quality. And I used to say that when something is not tested, well, it doesn't work. At least you don't know if it works. So if you know the pyramid of tests, you know that what is at the bottom of the pyramid is where you should put the most effort in terms of testing. So UI5 delivers tools or frameworks that allows you to deal with this base of the test pyramid. So you have QUnit for unit testing, on OPA for component and or integration testing. So what is OPA? Hopefully you already know what is QUnit, but what is OPA? OPA stands for One Page Acceptance Test. It's a UI behavior testing framework. So it's entirely based on JavaScript, and it's tightly integrated with UI5. So it allows you to run the application, and while the application is running, you can actually test what's going on in the application. So it's completely asynchronous, and there are some active polling mechanism that allows you to wait for the application to reach a certain state. Usually when you do OPA, you mock the backend. So you disconnect the UI from the backend, and you have a layer within OPA that allows you to mock the behavior of the backend. When it comes to executing those QUnit or OPA tests, it's as simple as running a web page. So that's, I would say, the beauty of this mechanism. You don't need complex tooling to develop or run this OPA test. You can just make sure that your application is being served, open the browser, then go to the right page, and you have your OPA and QUnit tests which are running. And by default, UI5 provides a sort of report that documents the execution results. So that's exactly what I will show you right now. So I will open the application that I presented actually during the UI5 Con 2018, which is a very simple, basic to-do application. I will make sure that the application is being served. So to do that, I will trigger the UI5 CLI tools that will open the web server to deliver the application. The application is served on port 8080. I now open the browser. And as you can see, I have access to the files of my application. So very quickly to introduce you to the application, it's a very basic application. It's actually a to-do application, a to-do list, where you have some tasks where you can create new ones and you can complete them, you can edit the setting of them, very basic. So to know if this application is working, I actually implemented some tests inside it. If I go to the test folder, I will open the file called test-suite-qunit.html, which is a sort of, I would say, index file that points to the QUnit and OPA test file. So if I open it, you can see the report which is being delivered by UI5 that will execute the test in the background, and that will give me a sort of status of if it's working or not. Unfortunately, for the OPA test, it's not very clear what's going on. So I will stop the execution here, and I want you to see what OPA test is about. So I will open the OPA test myself using this opatest.qunit.html. And here, what you can see is that you have the application running on the right, and on the left, you have the tests which are being executed, which are testing several steps and that are validating that what's going on within the application is actually respecting the expectations of the test. So what is interesting to see here is that most of the OPA tests that I develop are using what we call the iframe mode. So you have the application running in an iframe, and the tests themselves are running in the main page. There is another way to execute those OPA tests where you can have what we use the component mode, which means the application and the test are sharing the same window. But I don't really like this mode, but that's a personal preference. You can select which one you would like to use. When the tests are completed, you have a status. So here it's green, meaning everything is okay. So as a developer, whenever I need to implement my test, I can just run this page, and that's it. I can see if it's okay or not. If we compare our QUnit or OPA to the other automation frameworks, so you might have heard about Puppeteer, selenium-webdriver, IO. These are framework agnostic, which means when you develop testing with those tools, you need to rely on the generated HTML. So it means you will use CSS selectors, you will use IDs in your HTML in order to identify the elements that you want to interact with, but also to validate their status. So these tools are usually designed for end-to-end testing, which means when you use Puppeteer, Selenium, or WebDriver, what happens is that you run the application where it's being served. So you have a real backend behind the scene, and it's really designed for end-to-end testing. OPA, on the other hand, is designed by and for UI5 developers, which means you don't manipulate HTML. Instead, you really manipulate UI5 controls. So when you develop the OPA code, you will say, I want to get my M button inside this window, and that's it. Then OPA will translate this into CSS selector or whatsoever, but it takes care of encapsulating this complexity inside the framework. So that's really convenient when you want to develop a test with OPA. And it enables integration testing, as I mentioned, because you are mocking the backend, so you can test the UI without having a backend behind the scene. You might also have heard about WDI5. So WDI5 is built on top of WebDriver IO, and this great tool enables UI5 control selection. So it's like leveraging those WebDriver IO to the level of OPA so that you can actually select components based on the types rather than based on the HTML that is being generated. So WDI5 is a great tool. Still, it's designed to do end-to-end testing. So we are at a high level in the pyramid of test compared to OPA or QUnit. All these tools are great, but the final goal of these tests are to be integrated into a pipeline so that you can validate your code before merging the code or shipping the new version of what you've developed. So what I've showed you is working fine. As a developer, I can run that in a browser, but we need tooling so that those tests can be executed in an environment where you don't necessarily have someone watching at the results. So you need something to collect the results and indicate in the pipeline if your tests are correct or not. So this is why we will talk about the current situation about testing. So as of today, if you want to do such integration in a pipeline, what you can use is Karma. So Karma is a CI pipeline based on the Karma runner. So Karma itself is not coming with UI5, but UI5 delivered some tooling around Karma so that you can execute QUnit and OPA test using Karma. So let me show you that. The way it works is that inside this project, I have two configuration files. I have karma.conf, which configures the framework to be used. So here UI5, the UI5 URL, so the place where to get the UI5 resources, and some other options. And in order to do continuous integration automation, we have a karma.ci.conf, which inherits of the karma.conf, but provides additional settings, such as for code coverage, we have a preprocessor that will instrument the files to be ready to deliver coverage information. And we also have a reporter that is configured so that at the end of the execution of this Karma CI, we would have a coverage report being generated automatically. In order to run that, I can stop the server. So the server is not required to run Karma CI. I will just npm run, Karma CI. Ooh, here we go. And what will happen then? This tooling will take care of hosting the application, executing the test, and reporting on what happened during those testing. So you will see that it's using Chrome headless, so nothing appears on the screen, but behind the scene, we have a browser that is being instantiated. The tests are being executed. Karma has a way to keep track of the test execution. And when everything is completed, we will get a report saying that it works. Hopefully. And we should be good. Here we go. And we have 100% coverage. So let's go back to the slides. The Karma execution model is pretty simple. We have all the tests contained in the project, which are executed in one window. So even if we didn't see it, there is one browser being executed. And this browser has one window which executes all the tests. And these tests are executed inside one iframe inside this window. You will see why I'm explaining that in the next slide. What is important here is that all these tests are sequentially executed, which means you need to first execute the QUnit test, for instance, then the OPA test. So it's done sequentially. So it's not the most optimal way if you want to have fast execution of your test. But the good news is that you have coverage information for free. So you don't have to configure too much. You still have a configuration file to create, but you get coverage information out of your project without having to install new tools or whatsoever. Now the question is why I don't like Karma. Actually, Karma is pretty heavy. So not heavy in terms of framework to install, but heavy in the way it works. based on my experience, we have done in my teams a lot of OPA tests. And the fact that this OPA test might use iframes inside Karma window that is itself using iframes, this generates a huge memory consumption. And we had some big suites, some big test suites where these tests were abruptly aborted because of the memory consumption. I did some investigation there, and we reached 2 gigabytes of memory being consumed by the browser. So at some point, the browser couldn't handle that anymore and was just crashing, which somehow blocked us in our development because we could not rely anymore on Karma to execute this test. And just as a side note, these OPA tests were big enough to stand for 45 minutes. So we had to wait 45 minutes to make sure that the modification we did didn't break anything in the application. Bad news, Karma is also deprecated. So I have to put a big asterisk here. Deprecated doesn't mean that it doesn't work anymore. It just means that the Karma development team announced that they will not maintain the tool anymore. So what they will do, they promise to continue to deal with security updates for the next 12 months, but the product is on the verge of disappearing. So right now, Karma is still working, but we know that if we have big troubles with Karma, if we have bug report or whatsoever, the team will not work on this tool anymore. So what is the alternative? This is where I can now introduce ui5-test-runner. So put simply, the ui5-test-runner is the fastest way to automate QUnit on a PA test. First, it doesn't need any configuration. Well, almost no configuration. You can still configure it, but out of the box, it works, I would say, in 60% of the cases. On top of that, it enables parallel execution of the test pages. So if you remember, I told you that with Karma, our test suites we had to wait 45 minutes to see the final execution of the test. With ui5-test-runner, it takes more or less 20 minutes now. So it's a big, significant gain of time. And ui5-test-runner is also code coverage ready. So functionally speaking, it does almost the same thing as what you can do with Karma, but it aimed to do it better. So let me show you first what is ui5-test-runner. If I go back to the console here, what I will do, I will start by installing in ui5-test-runner. So installing is as simple as doing an npm install -g ui5-test-runner. You don't need to install it globally, but that's actually a simple way to install it. It can be a dependency of your project, for instance, if you want. Once you installed it, so it's pretty small out of the box, you can then execute it. And if you execute it inside a place where you have a UI5 project with a web app folder, a test suite QUnit.html and QUnit on OPA test, the test runner is clever enough to understand the structure of your project and simply execute the test with no parameters and even no configuration file. So I will explain you what's going on here. So the test runner comes with a web server. So I will explain why we have a web server inside the test runner. It will detect that you want to automate your UI5 application. By default, it will install puppeteer. So puppeteer will be installed if it's not present in your system, either as a local dependency of your project or installed globally. So if it's not found, it will install it. And if it's found, it will use it. But if it uses it, it will still check if you have the latest version of the automation tool. The reason behind is that it's pretty difficult for me to maintain all the possible variations of the versions you may use. So if you face any trouble with puppeteer, whatever version, the recommendation is always to use the latest one. So if you don't have the latest version, it will tell you that maybe you should upgrade it. It was pretty fast, but actually it executed the test. I don't know if you noticed, but you had 2 lines at some points, which means by default, the test execution will use 2 parallel execution. And once the test completed, then you will have a report showing you what happened, which test pages were detected and executed. And this is the text output. But obviously, you will also have a report being generated. So in the project, we have a report folder that was created. We have an output.txt, which corresponds to what you would see in your CI/CD pipeline. So you would have almost the same traces, but since it's inside the pipeline, there won't be any dynamic updates. That's why the output is a little bit different. I would like you to notice that we have some strange names being generated inside the report folder, and I will explain the reason after. But typically, every test execution, every page execution is associated to one folder. So in this folder, you will find lots of useful information that I will explain after, because it was not coming with version 1. This is new to version 3, well, version 2. We have a report, HTML, that is being generated. This report is self-sufficient, which means you can add it as an artifact of your pipeline, so that when you open it, let me do that this way. Okay, so if I open it here, so you get a report that will summarize the test execution. And for each test, you can dig down to see what happened. So here you can see that it's a QUnit test, and these other ones are OPA tests. If I dig down, I have the detail of everything that happened during that test, and I can dig down again to see all the assertions that were executed. So that's for QUnit test. But if I go back and I open an OPA test, what will happen then is that for every assertion that was evaluated, out of the box, this unit test runner is capable of extracting the screenshot of the application at the moment of the assertion. So that really allows you to see what was the state of the application when the assertion either succeeded or failed, because in case of failure, it also shows you the state of the application, which is quite interesting when you have to troubleshoot OPA failures. So that's the default execution. Now, if I complexify a little bit the use of ui5-test-runner, I would like to show you something else. So I will execute ui5-test-runner again, but this time I will request to have coverage being extracted. And while doing that, I will also specify a port, because this web server is important. So I will request code coverage to be extracted. And just for fun, I will also tell the test runner to use 4 parallel execution of the pages. So if I run this way, I can now go back in my browser, and I will use the port 8081. And I have a new path which is being offered by ui5-test-runner that allows me to see the report being built dynamically. So as a developer, for instance, I can follow the current execution of the test. So here you can see that it's executing the test pages, and we will see, yes, that we have 4 parallel execution of the test. Well, 3 now, but there is always a little bit of bootstrap time before the test starts. So here we are. And here we can, at any time, monitor the execution of a test by just opening it, and you see where it is. So here, for instance, not started, boom, started, screenshots, everything is updated dynamically, which is pretty cool if you want to follow the test execution and monitor what's going on during the test. So let me go back to the report, and I am disconnected, yes, because the execution ended. Out of the box, well, not out of the box, you have to specify the option, but then you will get code coverage being extracted also. You might notice that I don't have 100% code coverage anymore. The reason why is because the test files were also monitored, which is, I would say, not good. I could probably change that in the default settings, but out of the box, it will monitor all the files. It will instrument all the files. That's something that can be tweaked with options, but I want it to stay simple here. Okay, so what I showed you mostly correspond to the feature of version 1. So this version 1 was built as a proof of concept. My idea was to eliminate karma from our CI/CD pipelines and try to speed up a little bit the test execution. So and secure those test execution, because as a reminder, with karma, we had failures if we had too many tests and they were using too much memory. So this version 1 provided parallel execution, which allowed us not only to speed up the test execution, but also by isolating the test in one browser per tested page. If the page is taking too much memory or is breaking for whatever the reason, it doesn't prevent the test runner to execute the other pages. So the value of doing that is that it isolates the test execution from the others. So you have, I would say, a better report if you have any problem. This version 1 was delivered with puppeteer only, with the promise that you could integrate WebDriver, Selenium, or any other browser automation. But at that time, I was too lazy or not really interested in implementing more things inside version 1. I just wanted to somehow build a proof of concept and see how it would succeed or not. Another limitation of this version 1 was that whenever a test was failing, it was quite complicated to understand what was wrong. Out of the box, you would only get the QUnit traces, OPA traces, but for instance, you wouldn't get the browser traces. The screenshots were sometimes incomplete because I was capturing only the visible view, not the whole page. There was little problems like that, which I wanted to address. But the most important limitation of version 1 is that, as I mentioned, ui5-test-runner comes with a web server. So in order to test the application, in version 1, the ui5 test server was actually serving the UI5 application. And the inbuilt server was not as good as as UI5 CLI tools. So with UI5 CLI tools, you can have lots of middlewares. You can use transpiling to build your application so that you can use TypeScript, as it has been already explained in previous Devtoberfest presentations. So this version 1 of ui5-test-runner was only capable of serving JavaScript files inside the web app folder, and it was quite limiting in terms of what you could do with it. So that's the reason why I decided to move to a version 2 and then now to a version 3 in order to improve many different things inside it. And my initial goal was to make it fast, quickly at least, but I ended up rewriting most of the core of the tool, but that was for the good reasons. So as a result, now ui5-test-runner provides more feedback. So first of all, the command line parsing in version 1 was quite clunky and didn't necessarily, I would say, was not making any sense to make a long story short. So what I did, I integrated a real option parsing tool like Commander. And now we have a standard option parsing mechanism, which allows you to specify the options either using short names or long names, something that is really, I would say, professional. Also, you have seen that we have an interactive and standalone report. So that's really coming with version 3. In the previous version, you only had text output, and then you had an HTML report, but which required to download many files was quite a problem. So now the HTML file itself is self-sufficient, even if the screenshots needs to be copied with the report if you want to see them in the report. You now have browser traces. So depending on the browser, because you will see that I support more than one browser, you may have console traces, network traces, you may have even video recording, HAR recording. So you have additional tools which are coming so that you can troubleshoot your test execution in a better way than previously. And something that is also interesting is that I got the request of generating other reports just than the HTML one or the text one. So I implemented a way to plug custom report generation tools. And for instance, I deliver something called JUnit XML report so that you can have a nice report in Jenkins, for instance. If Jenkins is being used to do the automation of this test, you would have a nice dashboard showing you everything because I provide the JUnit XML report format out of the box. So I said that you have more browsers. So actually, yes, you have. So now it comes with Puppeteer, but it can also come with Playwright, which supports Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. This Playwright integration allows me to deliver video recording and HAR generation so that you have a complete network trace out of the box. You also have selenium-webdriver that allows you to integrate Chrome, Firefox, Edge. And there is even jsdom, which is kind of experimental, but that enables you to run your test with no browser at all. But I have to warn you that it's really for fun that it has been implemented because it's really cranky and it makes sense for QUnit, but for OPA, it's better to have a real browser. But what is really interesting here is that on top of this existing integration, ui5-test-runner comes with an open undocumented browser framework, which means you could integrate your own browser, provided you implement a command line that respects a very specific interface. And for the little story here is that Playwright integration is pretty recent. when I didn't know that this tool was existing. When I heard about Playwright, I looked into it and I was like, interesting. I could have video recording without having to spend too much effort doing that. And to integrate Playwright into ui5-test-runner, it took me less than 2 hours to integrate it. So really, it's about writing a command line that respects a specific interface and that just manipulate the browser so that ui5-test-runner doesn't have to do it. So we should. And this framework comes with what I call a capabilities tester. So if you ever want to develop your own command line to integrate a browser, which is not supported yet, you would have a way to test your command line to validate that the behavior of the browser you implemented is actually respecting what is expected by ui5-test-runner. So let me show you what it means. So ui5-test-runner comes with a tester. So if I use ui5-test-runner -- capabilities, I can then request ui5-test-runner to test an implementation. So I will, for instance, select the puppeteer browser, puppeteer.js. So here, it will validate the integration with puppeteer based on the capabilities of the browser. So it supports screenshots, scripts, parallel execution on traces. So I have a series of tests that will be executed out of this that will validate that the capabilities which are being exposed by the command line manipulating the browser are actually working the way they are supposed to. So I have a series of test pages that will validate that I can generate a screenshot, that I can execute some script either inside an iframe or outside an iframe. I also have a very short UI5 test execution to validate that with this browser, I can execute UI5 tests. So that allowed me to validate, for instance, my Playwright implementation. So let me show you. If I use Playwright, I will add additional options for fun. So Playwright, I will first keep the report to show you the result. And I will also request to do the video recording, and I will use visible so that you will see the browser pages being executed. So Playwright is not currently installed on my system. So the test runner integration will actually install Playwright. There is an additional step to be executed once you install the package. The command line is also taking care of that. And then you will have the execution of the test page, and it looks like it doesn't open anywhere. So I believe I may have made a mistake. Well, that's what we call the demo effect. Anyway, the test is being executed. So hopefully I will be able to show you the video recording. So all these tests are being executed by the test runner. There is a report folder being generated out of it, which contains for each test execution a folder. So what I want to show you from here is that, sorry, one window here. I will show you the video recording. So I search for WebM files. Why do I have only one? Yeah, here we go. So we have several, and I should pick the biggest one because they are pretty small. I should have this one, yeah, 77 kilobytes. If I open it inside the browser, this is the recording of this test page. So you can see that we have a simple unit test page which was executed. So we have the video of it. The screen resolution is quite small. That's because the default resolution is quite small, but you have options also to increase the resolution of the screen, which will make bigger videos. So that's all about this browser integration. Let's go back to the slides. But the biggest feature here, on top of everything you've seen so far, is that this tool is way more flexible than before. Something that is really important for me is that the dependencies of the ui5-test-runner are installed only if they are missing. So as I mentioned at the beginning, when I installed ui5-test-runner, it was pretty fast. You had only 6 packages to install. And if during the execution, the tool detects that it requires something that is not there, like Puppeteer or NYC for code coverage, then it will install it. I just want to show you something because I really like this for the wow effect. So if I show you ui5-test-runner, actually, I don't know if you know this this website, but I like this one. It's called Package Phobia. Package Phobia gives you the required space you need to install a package. So you can see, for instance, that version 3.3.3, which is a current version, is published with only 260 kilobytes and requires 577 kilobytes to install out of the box. If you look at the version 1.1.5, you can see that it is completely different. The package itself was smaller, 58 kilobytes, but boom, you needed 28 megabytes to install it. And the reason why it was because out of the box, ui5-test-runner was coming with puppeteer dependency, with NYC dependency. Now that everything is installed individually, if you don't use puppeteer, there is no reason why I would deliver the package with puppeteer. So if I go back to the latest version, 3.3.3, you have this additional tool that will show you the dependencies of the ui5-test-runner, and it's as simple as that. So you have very little number of dependencies. And actually, for the funny story, 3 of these dependencies are packages I created myself, and only 2 are coming from the ecosystem of Node.js. So I would say it's a self-sufficient package almost that only installs what is required during the execution. Let's go back to the slides. So this flexibility also comes in terms of execution mode. So what I showed you, where ui5-test-runner is responsible of serving the web application, is what I now call the legacy mode. So in the legacy mode, the runner is responsible of serving the application. But what's new with this version 2 and 3 is that you now have the remote mode. So the principle of the remote mode is that you already have the application being served on a website, and you want to test the test pages delivered by it. So the idea is that ui5-test-runner can now execute tests from an application that is already served. It doesn't need to serve it anymore. And why is it interesting here is that because it gives you access to the full-fledged of what you can do with ui5 CLI tools. So if you have a TypeScript application, if you developed your ui5 application with TypeScript, you just need to build it and serve it, and then you can use ui5-test-runner to execute the test. If you have some complex integration which requires some middlewares in ui5 CLI tools, I don't mind anymore. You just provide me a URL, and I'm able to execute the test for this application. So let me show you that. So typically, in order to demonstrate that, I think the best way, I wanted to pick applications where I cannot cheat. I cannot show you, I cannot, how to say that? There is no way I can lie about the fact that I'm not serving those files. So here, I looked into the ui5 documentation, and I grabbed some existing applications which are coming with test files. So you know that the ui5.sap.com websites provide demo application, but some of them actually contains test code. So I will just show you one here. If I go to this one, so this application is actually provided with test files. So it's all served from ui5.sap.com. And the idea is that I will use this URL in order to execute the test with ui5-test-runner. And just because I'm not afraid of the challenge, I will just execute many of them at the same time using parallel = 4. So because the command is quite long to type, I just created a shortcut. I will execute samples. And here you see what happens in the ui5-test-runner. So for each URL, what will happen is that ui5-test-runner will probe the URL to detect if the URL is like a test suite, which refers to OPA test on unit test, or if it's itself a unit test on OPA test. So once it decides, when it's finished probing all the URL, you get the list of test pages to execute, and then it will just execute them as the rest of the test execution. So it's a normal test execution here. But the main difference is that the ui5-test-runner is no more responsible of serving those applications. Instead, the web server exposed by the ui5-test-runner is used for other purposes, such as reporting, that you see here, but also it enables the monitoring of this test execution, because the way those tests are being executed in this remote application. I somewhat inject some scripts in the browser before executing the page so that I can hook the different QUnit events and send back the information to the ui5-test-runner using the inbuilt server of the ui5-test-runner. And it allows me to execute all these tests. This will not succeed because I didn't want to wait for all the tests to execute. So there is a timeout of 60 seconds, which is set. But long story short, yeah, here we reached the timeout, as you can see. But long story short, all the tests execute, which is quite interesting. So if I go back to the report here, you can see that we have executed almost everything, but one page failed with browser timeout because, again, I forced myself to 60 seconds to execute each page individually. Now, there are many options like that inside a ui5-test-runner because I am also a UI5 developer, and one of my main concerns when I wait for my test to be executed is that I know that if, for instance, an OPA test fails, the first failure is enough to stop the test because usually when an OPA test fails, the application is in a state that is not expected, so it's not relevant to continue testing the rest. So that's why I have options like fail fast that allows you to stop the execution of a page if ever one test fails inside an OPA page. So there are a lot of convenient tools which were added here. But then you might say, okay, you showed us UI5, but what about UI5 CLI? So let me show you with UI5 CLI. I will serve again the application locally using UI5 CLI tools. So this time I serve it in a different window so that I can continue using my terminal, but it's using UI5 serve. Once I've done that, I will reopen localhost 8080. I should have one somewhere. I hope to have one somewhere. I don't. Okay, let me open 8080. So in order to use ui5-test-runner on this served application, I will grab the URL of the test suite QUnit. So I copy this link address. And now I can simply go back to my terminal and type ui5-test-runner with this URL. And that's it. The same way, ui5-test-runner will probe the URL, detect that it's a test suite that contains links to OPA and QUnit test, and will queue all these pages and execute them as simple as that. That's That's for the test execution part. Still, we miss one thing, which is available with Karma, which was available with the legacy mode, and which I'm not showing here, code coverage extraction. So for code coverage, this one gave me some headaches because when you are getting the application, when the application is served from anywhere, because here it's a URL, so it can be either local or like you've seen on the ui5.sap.com website. So if you want to extract code coverage information, the only way to make it work is to make sure that the files which are being executed are actually instrumented. Luckily for me, UI5 provides a middleware that can instrument the files. So let me show you that while it's terminating here. I will open my ui5.yaml configuration file. On here, I'm using the UI5 middleware code coverage middleware. So what this middleware does, it will change the way those files are being served so that you can request to have them instrumented. How does it work? So here, the test execution completed. If I go back to my localhost 8080, if I open component.js, for instance, so this is the source of my component.js. So I have no instrumentation here. But actually, using a URL parameter, I can request the middleware. I can request the middleware to put instrumentation code in it. So by adding instrument equal true, what happens is that the middleware, which is inside the UI5 CLI tools, will modify, will instrument on the fly the component.js file and provides me instrumented code that I can use in order to extract the code coverage. So let's try it. Provided that you have this middleware installed inside your UI5 CLI tools UI5 configuration, I can now request coverage. And Then the execution will happen again, but this time it will leverage the fact that you have the middleware being installed, and it will make sure that whenever a source file is being requested, we have this instrument equal true being added, and it will run the application with the instrumented source file so that code coverage can be extracted from the execution. So that's really fresh out of the press, something that I developed almost last week. So something that is interesting is the way the UI5 team or whoever implemented this middleware conceived the middleware. So the middleware expects that you use instrument equal true in order to get instrumented files, and then it expects that you send back the code coverage information to a dedicated endpoint exposed by the CLI tools so that it generates the reports for you. The problem I have with that is if I do that this way, the report might be generated anywhere because the URL that I have can be served from anywhere. I know it's localhost, but in theory, you could run this test from anywhere. So instead of using the endpoint, I simply inverted the logic here. I did a bit of inversion of control. What I do, I collect the code coverage information and I reuse NYC locally in order to generate the report myself. So I kind of use half of the middleware, but at least I can get the same thing. The only thing that is quite the drawback of that is that it forces me to somewhat get back all the files which were used during the application execution. So that's why you have here a source folder that appears, which forces me to re-download all the files without instrumentation so that I can build the code coverage report and that you can see the source files which are being reported on. So let me show you that. If I open coverage, sorry, wrong window again. So here you can see that we have code coverage information being extracted, and you can actually dig down the source files to see which lines were executed and how many times and all the things like that. But that forced me to re-download the files. And then I thought, why stopping there? I now have a way to execute tests remotely, and I understand better how I can somewhat inject code coverage information inside those source files. So we have the middleware for UI5 CLI tool, but what about if you don't have the UI5 middleware? If you have a website like the ui5-test-runner that serves an application, and you will really like to know if you could extract code coverage from it. So let me go back to the samples that I executed previously. So let's say this one. And I will show you something. So if I go to the website of ui5-test-runner and I extract from the web app the component preload.js, here you get the application which is packed into a component preload.js file. So first reflex, do they use the UI5 middleware to serve this file? If I put instrument equal yes, true, sorry, I still get the same file. So it makes me think that there is no middleware that would allow me to get an instrumented version of this file. But what can I do here? Typically, what I can do is that instead of executing the test accessing ui5-test-runner, why not using ui5-test-runner as a sort of proxy that redirects all the requests to this website? But every time I get a JavaScript file, I take the opportunity to inject instrumentation inside those JavaScript files. So that's something which is really new. I never heard about, I never talked about it yet, but I implemented a new mechanism that allows me to create a sort of coverage proxy so that even if you don't want to install the UI5 middleware, or if you're serving your application with something that is not UI5 CLI tools, there are some situations where you could extract code coverage from this test execution. So I have to execute the command with a shortcut because it's quite long for the moment. Again, it's experimental. The idea is that I will tell ui5-test-runner to execute this URL. For some technical reason I don't want to explain here, I need to disable UI5. And then you have this coverage proxy option, which is an experimental option. And then I can specify which files to include and which files to exclude. And just to show you what happens during the execution, I also included debug coverage so that you will see which files are being ignored and which files are being covered. So if I execute sample coverage.cmd, so everything I said before is still working, but you will notice that instead of accessing the application using ui5.sap.com, actually what will happen is that, see, it goes through localhost 8081. So the server of ui5-test-runner acts as a proxy, which will deliver the same files than ui5.cp.com. But while doing that, it can actually decide to instrument some of the files. See, this one, for instance, was instrumented on the fly. So as a result, when the application is being executed, it's executed with instrumented files, which means I can grab code coverage from this application. And then at the end of the execution, the same way, I will download all the files. Well, it's already done on the fly, actually. I get all the files which were instrumented. So these are the instrumented files. These are the source files which were instrumented. So you retrieve the component preload that I showed you, and then you have the instrumented version of component preload. And the ui5-test-runner is doing the mapping between the two, so that at the end of the day, when the tests are finished, you can have coverage information here. So I hope that that gives you the, I would say, a good idea of how flexible the tool is. And I would like to finish this presentation with the key takeaways. So first of all, my biggest motto here is if it's not tested, it does not work. Okay, so that's something. If there is one thing I want you to remember is this sentence: please test whatever you're doing. Remember that Karma is deprecated and is on the verge of disappearing. It's still there for the moment, no rush, but it might be the right time to look for new tools. And I believe that the ui5-test-runner is quite a convenient tool to replace Karma because it allows you to run QUnit on OPA test. And it's quite flexible. I would even say it's flexible enough to adapt to any scenario. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Arno. That was absolutely amazing. My brain is hurting a little bit. Such great deep dive into, well, the background, into Karma, the problems with Karma, the deprecation, and that really landed ui5-test-runner for me and hopefully for the other folks watching as well. So thank you again so much. We did have one question in the chat, but I hope I've answered it. It was from Radesh. I might have misunderstood Radesh, so let me know, but you're not allowed to run npm, so how can you run these tests? Basically, you can't. If you don't have access to npm,
yes, that's right.
That's, you might as well forget this whole thing, Node.js. Using Node.js requires the use of npm. Otherwise, it's like having a car with no fuel.
Indeed.
Okay, so I think we're coming to the top of the hour. So thank you once again, Arno. That was amazing. I feel slightly guilty because the number of tests I run is not maybe as much as high as I should run. But anyway, I'm feeling nicely guilty, but also nicely educated. Remember, folks, in a couple of hours' time, there's the gaming night version 2, or 2 of 2. So head on over to that. Look at the Devtoberfest calendar to find out the link. The link's also in the chat. Have a great rest of Friday. Have a great weekend, and see you next week.